Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. It's getting slow right now in the NFL. The news is drying up. We're hearing the same old reports every single day. The Giants are interested in this quarterback. Oh, they're interested in this receiver. It's just over and over. I can't wait for the NFL draft. I'm getting tired of rumor and speculation season, but there's still some important things and interesting topics to talk about. So I'm excited to go ahead and dive into those.
I was going to say, good news. This episode is all about rumors and speculation. So we're going to lean right into that because unfortunately, as you mentioned, that's really all that's going on right now for both of these teams. But wanted to first start with the New York Giants and their general manager, Joe Schoen, who came out and said, well, like, hey, there's some other needs as well besides quarterback. So how do we want to run with this one? A Giants going weapon in the first round?
I mean, if I was a betting man, I would say that they probably are going weapon in the first round, but you also have different reports. I mean, I just read one this morning from Jordan Rannon of ESPN, who I'll always credit because he got last year's pick spot on the day of the draft. He said, watch Deonte Banks. They went ahead and got Deonte Banks. I think that he is the most plugged in Giants beat writer when it comes to the NFL draft for one reason or another. He said today, if the right quarterback is on the board, they will not hesitate to take that quarterback. But, of course, Joe Schoen earlier this week, it was in some sort of report, I think with Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated, said, we have other needs. Everyone is assuming we're going quarterbacks, but we have other needs. So possible that it's just assumptions on the QB front. Maybe they're really targeting Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Rome Odunze. Those are really talented prospects. And listen, as a Giants fan, I want a quarterback because I struggle to sit there and see the future and see the vision with Daniel Jones still playing quarterback in 2024 and beyond. But if the Giants land a Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze, I'm also not going to complain because he is right. This team does have other needs. If you look at the starting lineup on paper, defense and offense, there are a lot of holes on this Giants team. So taking the best player available approach isn't necessarily the worst thing. If the Giants land a blue chip prospect at 6, that's not a quarterback, I'm still going to be happy. But I do prefer the quarterback, of course, as I've made very clear on this show. But taking a Malik Neighbors, it's really not something you complain about because Joe Schoen is right. There are a lot of needs on this roster.
Yeah, there definitely is. And it's going to be dependent on what happens at the top of the draft with the teams in front of the New York Giants for the quarterbacks. And we know that the Minnesota Vikings are loading up and they seem like a team destined to trade up for a quarterback. And then there's some other quarterback needy teams like the Raiders or Denver. So it's going to be really interesting to see. Now, you tell me if I'm wrong here, but the vibe I'm getting right now, and again, it's subject to change, that the Giants would take a quarterback if there's one there at pick number 6, but not necessarily mortgaging picks to get up and take someone. So if the 4 quarterbacks are gone in the first 5 picks, that they would be comfortable going receiver.
I think they'd be comfortable going receiver, but it's hard to say that they wouldn't trade up because at the same time, you had Lance Zierlein, NFL.com insider yesterday, was asked on Twitter, what do you expect the Giants to do? He said, I predict that they will trade up into the 3rd or 4th spot in the draft. And like we've mentioned before, Rich Eisen was discussing how he heard all throughout the combine that the number 1 team that was trying to trade up was the New York Giants. So clearly there's some interest from this team in trading up. They have definitely made some phone calls, but whether or not they want to do that so badly that they're willing to sacrifice a lot of assets, I think that's the big question. I think really what's going on here is the Giants would like to move up, would like to get that quarterback, but they're going to wait to see how the draft board falls because they don't want to overpay for the wrong guy. And I think that they also have a price limit where they're saying, hey, we'll give up this much, but if not, we're fine just sitting back and taking the best player available, getting that blue chip wide receiver. And maybe they're just content doing that regardless, and they won't take the quarterback that's on the board at 6. That's also possible. But we've just heard so many rumors and so much information indicating that the Giants want to move up, want to trade and be aggressive and get that quarterback. And when you look at Joe Shane's draft history with the Bills and the Giants, he loves to trade up and make sure that he gets his guy. But ultimately, as you mentioned, there are just so many teams trying to move up and get that quarterback, and so many teams at the top that need that quarterback. It's just going to be really tough for the Giants sitting at number 6 to luck into that quarterback that they like falling into their laps at this point.
Yeah, that's it, right? Like it's going to be tough for it to kind of just break their way. And sure, it's the NFL draft and anything's possible, but then over the next 2 weeks, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of discussion on it, who's going to go where. But I think I find it hard to believe that a JJ McCarthy would be sitting there at pick number 6 for the Giants. I do think if they want that quarterback, they would have to trade up. It's an interesting call out to mention Joe Shane's past history with the Buffalo Bills, because he was a big part of the Josh Allen move up, and they had to jump a couple of spots to do it. I don't know if the Giants are going to have to do it that way, in order to land a quarterback. But at the very least, it seems like you have 2 teams in Arizona and the Chargers in front of you who seem like they'd be willing to pick up the phone. It's not like you have the 5 picks in front of you where it's every single one of those teams are going to stick and pick. I think someone is moving out, and you kind of just got to find that team that's willing to do it. And it's unfortunate, but you might have to overpay a little bit to get up there.
Right, and that's just the only thing is I don't know if the Giants are willing to overpay. I think they'd like to move up if they can, but like I said, I think they have a price limit based on all the different rumors and reports. And with Joe Shane, I love talking about that Buffalo Bills Josh Allen selection, because if you really dive into the history of it and read some reports from back then, it was Joe Shane who made the phone calls to other teams. It wasn't Brandon Beane, the general manager. He left that for his assistant at the time, Joe Shane, to do. He made the phone calls with those other teams, negotiated the prices with Brandon Beane, and then Brandon Beane, of course, officially signed off on those deals. But it was pretty much Joe Shane orchestrating the whole thing. And keep in mind that the Bills didn't just trade up a few spots. They traded up from the back end of the first round twice to get up into the top 10. They made 2 big trades similar to what the Minnesota Vikings are trying to do right now, making 2 trades to get into the top 5. That's what the Buffalo Bills did. That's like as aggressive as you can get from a GM standpoint, making 2 trades to get in the top 10 and get your quarterback. That's going balls to the walls. But that's what we've seen from Joe Shane, and it's what we've come to expect. Even with the trade for Brian Burns, that was a very aggressive move at the start of free agency. The trade for Darren Waller last year. The guy loves to make trades, even if you want to go into the 2023 NFL draft. The Giants were picking 25th. Deontay Banks was on the board at 24. They traded up 1 spot to make sure that nobody jumped them. And then again, in the 3rd round, Jalen Hyatt falling down the board, traded up to get him. So Joe Shane loves to make trades. I would not rule it out that the Giants move up to the 3rd or the 4th overall selection in this draft. I think it's very possible. But again, it's just about how much are they willing to sacrifice to get up there with all these other teams who are inevitably going to drive up that asking price, would create a bidding war, and just make it really tough to move into those top spots.
Now, not necessarily on the running order, but it could impact the NFL draft. Darren Waller seemingly not unsure if he wants to continue playing or not. So I'll pitch you Brock Bowers at 6, on the table, off the table for the New York Giants.
It's something that we discussed a long time ago, like early in the pre-draft process. Could that be an option? And at one point it was like, maybe, but honestly, no, I don't think that it's an option for the Giants. I think that what this team really needs is a dynamic outside receiving threat, somebody who can create separation on the boundary, in the middle of the field, at every level of the field. And not saying that Brock Bowers can't do those things, but tight ends primarily work more in the middle of the field, and I think that the Giants kind of like their options there. They've got Wan'Dale Robinson, who's a small, shifty, underneath receiver who does a lot of his dirty work in the middle of the field, and they also have, hopefully, Darren Waller coming back, but if not, they also have Daniel Bellinger, who they like a lot in the middle of the field. They need a vertical threat who can also be an underneath threat, like just really a dynamo wide receiver. They've got Hyatt, he's your outside go ball getter. And you've got Darius Slayton, who's a really solid number 2. But this team has been missing a number 1 ever since they traded away Odell Beckham Jr. And I think that if it's not quarterback, they're finally going to have to just say, hey, it's time to find that Odell Beckham Jr. replacement. It took us years and years to finally get to this point, but now's the time.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. By the way, if I'm the Giants, I wouldn't be taking Brock Bowers. If it's for if it's the 4 quarterbacks off the board before the Giants are on the clock, I think Malik Neighbors is one that makes a lot of sense for them because, as you said, they're looking for a number 1 receiver, and I think he's someone who could come in and be that 1,000-yard guy in year 1, which isn't always the case. Sometimes it takes receivers a couple years before they get their footing, but someone like Neighbors, man, I think he can come in and be productive right away, even if the Giants have a rocky quarterback situation, right? Like it wouldn't necessarily be the most ideal spot for a young wide receiver because of the quarterback play. But I mean, we've seen it around the league. Garrett Wilson's a great example of it. A wide receiver who's just that good that he can produce even if the quarterback play isn't up to par.
I think that's exactly right with Malik Neighbors. I mean, I love his talent. I love his playing style. I think that he brings you size. He brings you a ton of speed and athleticism. He brings you run after the catch ability, and he brings you strength at the catch point and pretty refined route running as well. Like, this guy is the complete package. In most years, he's the wide receiver 1 in the draft class. It just happens to be the year where Marvin Harrison Jr. is also coming out. So most people have him as the consensus number 1. There are a lot of people who think Malik Neighbors is the best receiver in this draft class, and you shouldn't discount that either. So a very talented player. And again, I think with what the Giants need, they do need some run after the catch ability. They do need a guy who can run some really solid routes and create separation at all 3 levels. Malik Neighbors just fits the bill so perfectly for them. So if it's not a quarterback at 6 or at 3 or 4, wherever they end up picking, I mean, I would love it to be a quarterback, but if not, I'll be thrilled if it is Malik Neighbors.
Absolutely. So with that, why don't we transition and get into some consensus picks? So the NFL mock draft database has data for each pick and what the most popular draft pick is. So I think that'd be interesting to go through and look at in the top 10 here. So if we pull this up, no surprise, Caleb Williams, 99% of mock drafts and they're going number 1 overall. Next is Jaden Daniels at number 2 to Washington. Any surprise before we keep going? Any surprise that Daniels gets mocked there more than Drake May, or is that kind of just the consensus now at this point?
Yeah, it's not the surprise because I feel like it's something that we keep seeing and we keep hearing is that that's who Washington prefers is Jaden Daniels, but not a surprise. But to me, it's not the right decision. I think that Drake May is the better player and would ultimately be the better pick, but I guess it really comes down to each team and what they want for their scheme.
Absolutely. So then you have Drake May at 3. So 3 quarterbacks off the board. No trades in this. This is kind of just with each team stuck in picks. So Drake May, then Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze at pick 6 at the New York Giants, the most popular one at 21%. I'm going to be honest, that one kind of surprised me. I wouldn't have guessed Odunze there at 6 for the Giants.
Well, I would say it is only 21%, so that probably would tell me there's a wide range of prospects that are being mocked to the Giants, which is totally the case. And I think that's kind of a great thing for the Giants right now. Their consensus pick, their mock draft popularity being so low really does indicate nobody knows what they're planning. Nobody knows what they're doing. It could be QB, it could be receiver. I mean, hell, it could even be offensive line at this point. I would love Odunze at 6 if this is how the board fell. If nobody made any trades and the board fell exactly like this, Rome Odunze is the best player available to me outside of Joe Alt. And I would be happy with him at number 6. But at that point, if this is the way the board is looking, you'd probably have to be a little bit disappointed if you're the Giants, because I think you would prefer Malik Neighbors or a quarterback. But Odunze would be a fine consolation prize.
Yeah, I mean, in this scenario, right, like I think if there were no trades, you'd have to take JJ McCarthy there at pick 6, right? He is the most popular choice. We'll skip down a little bit to the Vikings at 11, 34%. But you have to imagine again that if the Vikings were the team to draft JJ McCarthy, that they'd have to be trading up for him, and then that would push one of Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors down to the Giants. So you're a good call out though, that only 21%, that tells you exactly right that you have no idea what it's going to be for the Giants and that there are a ton of different options there. But for the Jets, I was kind of surprised that not that Brock Bowers was the lead, like that's a very popular pick for the New York Jets, but 66%, that is a pretty large number. Like you have obviously like Joe Alt, 77%. That's a very popular pick. Dallas Turner, edge rusher to the Atlanta Falcons from Alabama, 81%. But Brock Bowers at 66% was a little bit surprising for me as the consensus.
I think that's pretty high. 66% is pretty high for Brock Bowers to the Jets. However, whenever I do look at these mock drafts, it feels like I often see headlines Jets land tight end, like Jets take Brock Bowers. It almost feels like a lot of the mock drafts, and if this is based on mock draft popularity, a lot of them just throw together Jets and Brock Bowers in the headline because they know people will read it. And that's how it seems to have been the past few weeks with these mock drafts. And you get the same thing for a lot of teams, but that Bowers to the Jets one just feels popular for writers to put in order to gain some traction for the site more so than anything. And I don't know if that's necessarily the way things are going to shape out for the Jets. It's totally possible that they take Bowers at 10, and I would praise that pick. I think that it would be a great selection. However, looking at their true needs, long-term and short-term, I think we've kind of discussed this before. Offensive tackle and probably a trade down would be the preferred thing. But if you are just sticking and picking, Bowers is probably the best player available on the board there, and he does upgrade your offense. So it could be a pretty good selection. But again, when you're talking about mock draft popularity and consensus picks, it almost just feels like it's a media narrative that's being driven just for excitement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and call out there. I want to pull up the comment from First State Jets. He says, I think Bowers is our quote worst draft option at 10, and Bowers being the worst option is a great problem to have. I don't even like, and I don't think First State is meaning that in like a disrespectful way towards Bowers, but I don't even know if that would technically be the worst scenario for the New York Jets. Now, I think I've made my stance pretty clear. My preference is the Jets to trade back and get a second round pick, but something that you said, it wouldn't be a bad thing if the Jets stuck and took Brock Bowers. It'd be a really exciting piece for this offense, and that would push, in my opinion, at least, Alan Lazard way down the depth chart, because yes, technically two different positions. One's a wide receiver and one's a tight end, but Brock Bowers, I think, would take over like that big slot role that Alan Lazard played in Green Bay. And then you have, on the outside, Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson, and you could still use Tyler Conklin, who I think has been pretty productive in pretty bad circumstances the last 2 years with the Jets. So 66% to me seemed high. Like, I wouldn't think that it's the most likely scenario, to be honest with you. I do think that offensive line is still the most likely scenario for the New York Jets. And I would even put a wide receiver over Brock Bowers. Like, I think I would say even Romo Dunze, and even if you have to move up a couple spots in front of the Bears to get him, would be more likely than Bowers. What's your take on that?
I think the most likely thing is that the Jets trade down. And I know that we kind of discussed this in the last episode, what teams would maybe want to trade up. And then you sent me the message of the Indianapolis Colts reportedly interested in trading up for Brock Bowers. I think that the Jets trading down 5 spots, maybe getting an extra second round pick. Colts take Bowers. Jets get an offensive tackle, whether it's Fuaga, Fontenot, whoever it might be. That's the ideal scenario. And I also think it's a pretty likely scenario for the Jets that they do move down in order to gain that extra draft capital, because this is a team that I think could use the depth for long-term planning, right? You could use extra picks to throw at the dartboard, to have guys in place for when a lot of these aging veterans do move on. And for the Jets, a lot of this team is comprised of older players. I mean, you're talking the quarterback spot with Aaron Rodgers being, of course, an older spot, but really looking at the offensive line with Simpson, with Smith, with Moses. These guys are older, and they're not going to be here too long. I mean, new acquisitions, great short-term upgrades, but what's the long-term plan on the offensive line? I'm not sure you can find one. So trading down, taking offensive linemen, and then maybe taking another one in the second round, I'm not against that idea either if you double dip at that position, but you can only do that if you trade down. I wouldn't trade up for an Odunze if I were the Jets. I think that you can get by with what you have offensively, maybe sign someone on the free agency market later in the offseason if you really need to, or make a little bit of a trade down the road if you really want to go that route. I think that you can get by with the receiving core that the Jets have. if you wanted to compare it to the Giants, I mean, Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson far surpasses the 3 receivers that the Giants have anyway. So a lot of teams would be happy to have that duo, let alone adding in an Odunze to the trio. But I wouldn't sacrifice more assets to move up and add more receiver talent, because I do think that there are bigger needs on the board for the New York Jets.
Yeah, I just want to go back to Tony the GM's comments. As the Jets trade back would be easier. Best edge, corner, tight end, defensive tackle, and good receiver available at 10. Because I think that's something that, one, we said, like, you got to find a trade partner, and the call out with the Colts, who are potentially interested in moving up to take Brock Bowers. But especially if I guess it really depends on what I think the Falcons do at pick 8. Like, they could go the first defensive player off the board, but it is right to call out, like, you could probably get the best cornerback, whoever you view there. Interior defensive linemen, like maybe Byron Murphy, his name starts to come up a little bit at that point. So I do think it's a wise thing to call out that even if for whatever reason the quarterbacks are all gone, most people assume, like, hey, teams are trading up for a quarterback, like Bowers, a corner, maybe even offensive lineman. Like, I don't know, it's not a guarantee that 2 offensive linemen go in the top 10. So if a team like, I don't know, the Saints at 14, maybe they want to jump in front of the Broncos and the Raiders, who are 2 teams who could potentially look to go offensive line. Like, I think there would be opportunities to move back is the point that I want to make.
No, and I totally agree with you. I think there's going to be a ton of opportunities for the Jets to move down. It'll probably come down to how far are they willing to move down? What are they looking to recoup in a trade down? Are they making it a second round pick a necessity, or maybe they're okay with a third round pick, which again is a discussion we've had in a previous episode, kind of about what's our price floor basically for the Jets. But trading down is definitely an attractive option for the Jets, and trading up for those other teams behind the Jets is going to be attractive because of who's going to be on the board. And I think this comment perfectly summarizes that the best cornerback is not expected to go off the board until at least pick 10. Same with DT, same with tight end. There's going to be good receivers available. How high will a team take some of those other receivers, like Brian Thomas Jr., Adonai Mitchell? We'll see on draft night. You always get a surprise. Somebody always goes earlier than you expect, especially I feel like at the wide receiver spot. So I could totally see a team trading up to 10. Maybe they have a division rival who's in front of them, who also wants that receiver they heard through the grapevine. They're like, screw it, let's move up extra far. Let's make sure that doesn't happen at all. And they take another receiver, or that could go for any position, basically. So I think this is a really well thought out comment. It's true that there's going to be a lot of talent on the board. And then you can also tie that in. If the Jets want to go best player available, they're going to get a damn good prospect.
Yep, absolutely. And Peter chimes in. He says, pick 10 is such a pivot point for any team wanting to come up, but no matter where the Jets pick in the first, they have to get offensive help. Yeah, that's really it. I think the only thing that I would be upset with is if they went somewhere on the defensive side of the ball, especially after last year, the Will McDonald pick. Such a controversial one. They miss out on the offensive tackles all go in front of them. Broderick Jones, the last one, and the Steelers trade up. And then they pass on taking a wide receiver to go with an edge rusher, which really, that to me, that's the only thing. Like, there's a lot of people who are so against taking offensive line, and there are a lot of people who are so against taking Brock Bowers. I don't think that's where the energy should be. I think you should be able to realize that, both of those positions could have a very big impact on the Jets, not only this year, but in coming years. And that really the only thing that should be looked at as an issue would be if they went on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I'd be in agreement with that. I think this Jets defense has more than enough talent to get by. And, there's been a lot of conversation since last offseason about making sure that Aaron Rodgers has the pieces in place to maximize his talent and the potential of this team. And I think you have to stick to that. The Jets have done a lot already to add talent around Rodgers. They've upgraded the offensive line in ways that they could have so far. They've, added in receiving help with Mike Williams, but got to keep going. I think you got to keep adding talent to this offense and creating a lineup here that is conducive towards winning football. And hopefully Aaron Rodgers does return to form from the injury and maximizes the talent. And whichever first round pick the Jets bring in on the offensive side of the ball will help him do that.
Oh, we got some breaking Jets news that we could react to live on the show. You ready for this?
Here we go.
Okay. So Ashton Davis is back. The Jets are re-signing Ashton Davis, according to Mike Garafolo. 2023 round pick, had interest from a few other teams after career high in 3 interceptions in 17 games last season, but wanted another year with head coach Saleh and defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich. There we go. I am happy with that. The Jets very clearly needed to bring a third safety in. I like Chuck Clark a lot. I think he's going to be an upgrade over Jordan Whitehead, but coming off the ACL last year, and Ashton Davis, man, like first few years in the league, kind of rocky. He would come up with the big play and get the turnover, but was also prone to allowing big plays. But that kind of settled down a little bit last year in 2023. So I like it that as a core special teamer and someone who could essentially be your third safety. I think it's a good move.
I agree with you. I think it's always good to have depth in the secondary. The secondary is one of those position groupings that seems to get banged up a lot. You'll see a lot of injuries there. And then when you add in the special teams value, as you just mentioned, it's really good to have good depth because your depth players are your special teamers. And it's always good to have a good special team. So I definitely agree with you. It's a good signing and a nice depth piece here for the Jets.
I love it. Good stuff. Not the sexiest of things breaking news reaction wise, but important role player on this Jets team. So I will take it. I think it's a wise move. And look at that, a reaction right here on Big Apple Blitz. Things you love to see.
Imagine if there was a trade down that broke and we could live react to that while talking trade downs. That's what I wish would have happened. But can't complain too much. A little bit of breaking news, always fun to react to.
Yeah. So that would be obviously ideal, but who knows? Maybe next week, or we'll be live on the morning of draft day. So you never know.
That's right.
Things could happen.
Something crazy could happen.
Let's get to speaking of trades and just moving around. Let's get back into our next Giants topic of the day. Round 2 quarterback, which was who was that? Kuiper had a round 2 quarterback for the Giants, I believe.
He did. He had the Giants trading up in the second round to the first pick of the second round to draft Bo Nix out of Oregon.
Okay. No, I put Penix in the graphic because I feel like that's someone who is normally like top of the second round, the guy that's going. But Bo Nix at the top of the second round, I think he finds his way in the first round. I would be personally, and you tell me if you feel otherwise, but I'd be surprised if Bo Nix doesn't go in the first round.
Honestly, I think he's going to land in round 2. I think there's a good chance that he slides, but it's 50-50. I think there's a higher chance that Penix goes in round 1. And, for what it's worth, I prefer Penix. If both of those quarterbacks say don't go in the first round and they're both sitting there in round 2 and the Giants took Malik Neighbors in round 1, if the Giants were to consider trading up for one of these quarterbacks and, all things constant, both of those guys are on the board, I'm taking Penix over Nix for sure, I think, just based on talent. But there are other factors you have to consider, injury history and all that stuff. But Bo Nix making it to round 2 doesn't seem outside of the realm of possibility for me personally. But maybe it's a case where if the Giants want either one of these guys, Penix or Nix, they were going to have to trade up into the back end of the first round potentially. And you know what? Then you get the 5th-year option on the rookie quarterback. That could also be exciting.
There you go. My preference of the two, I think, would be Penix as well. I know that he's a little bit older and the injury history is legit. Like that is obviously like you have to factor that in. But I like his game more than Bo. Like Bo Nix doesn't really do anything that excites me. I just look at him as a kind of a very like boring, like steady prospect. Maybe he turns into something more at the next level, but I feel like he was kind of tapped out at Oregon. Like, I don't know how much is really left for him to take that next step in his development.
I would agree with you on that one. And then you mentioned injury history with Penix. That is a huge question mark for the New York Giants in particular, because if you're reading the reports about why they're looking at quarterbacks in this draft in the first place, and if you're listening to what any of the rumors are saying and what Joe Schoen himself is saying, the Giants have not changed their stance on their evaluation of who Daniel Jones is as a player. They've changed their stance on whether or not they want to build around him due to his injury history. So taking Penix doesn't really align with that. If they're worried about Daniel Jones's injury history, and that's the reason that they want to move on from him, Daniel Jones's injury history is pretty significant. Michael Penix is as arguably more significant and longer and dirtier. I mean, you're talking shoulder injuries, knee injuries. Daniel Jones with the neck injury, that could potentially be career ending, which is, of course, one of the reasons that they want to move on from him. If he takes another neck injury, that could be dunzo for Daniel Jones. But with Penix, considering all of the injuries that he's had, it doesn't really make sense for the Giants to go from injury-prone quarterback to injury-prone quarterback, basically. And that's why I just keep going back in this conversation. The further down the list of quarterbacks that you get, the more red flags, the more reasons for concern that you're going to find. If the Giants really are dead set about taking a quarterback, and I know Kuiper had them trading up for Bo Nix in the second round of this mock draft, but if they're really going to take a quarterback, I think it just has to be in round one. You're going to have too much risk with these other guys like Penix and like Bo Nix. You're not going to get the same rewards and the same benefits early on in their careers as you would with those top four guys. And I think that that's ultimately, you looking at those red flags with those other two, you got to go with one of those top four quarterbacks. Or at that point, I think if the Giants don't get a QB in round one, man, take the best cornerback available in round two, add that with the best receiver that you got in round one. Just start building out the rest of the roster and take your QB in 2025.
Now, what about this outside the box thought for the Giants in round two? Johnny says, what about a kicker in the second round? Graham Gano was banged up last year, Anthony. I think he only played 8 games. So you need that kicker of the future. Is second round too rich?
You know, I haven't scouted the kicker prospects yet in this draft. They haven't gotten around to the kickers quite yet. So I'm not sure. Maybe there's a generational talent who will be on the board, and it's possible. But ultimately, I don't think that's going to happen.
He follows it up with saying, all jokes aside, if the Giants could get J.J. McCarthy, you would get a dog. I really believe he will be a really good quarterback in the league. Johnny's very high on J.J. McCarthy. I know a lot of people are. And I do agree, and to kind of bring it back to the quarterback conversation, I do think there's a pretty big drop off from JJ to Penix and Bo Nix as prospects. And for me, with Penix, it's more age and injury history than anything. It's, to me, it's not a talent issue for me. I think he can play, but I don't know. And you bring up a good point too for the Giants with Daniel Jones worrying about, his injury concerns, to then turn around and draft a guy who's has a long injury history in college would be kind of wild. So if they were to go quarterback, I think it'd be for a first round quarterback. I don't think I see them as a team who would take that swing on a Bo Nix, Michael Penix level quarterback.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of throw out my take on JJ McCarthy. I'm starting to warm up to him even more. I've been getting warmer and warmer on JJ McCarthy as we get further through this draft process. The more that I read about him, the more stats that I find. And also part of it is the colder that I get on other prospects. Like early on in this pre-draft process, man, I was really high on Jaden Daniels. I've seen some stats since then and dived into some more information on him that's made me a little bit colder on him, and has me now thinking I have JJ McCarthy and Jaden Daniels in the same tier here with the quarterback prospects. I don't think that that's that crazy. Some will definitely disagree with me because JJ McCarthy is such a polarizing prospect, but I do think there's a lot to like. And honestly, I think the Giants see it as well. And if he is on the board at number 6, if somehow he falls into their laps, I think the Giants are going to go ahead and take that QB, whether it's McCarthy, Daniels, or May. But again, it's really just about lucking out at that point, because this draft order is going to get really interesting. There's going to be trades. There's going to be shakeups. There always is. But I also keep saying there's always a player that falls. There's always a quarterback that you expect to go top 5. He always does. He's definitely going top 5. Never happens. Some of them always end up falling down the draft board. Think about Will Levis last year, fell all the way into the second round. You know what? Even think about the Jets quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. He was supposed to be a top 5 pick. He went in the 20s to the Packers. It happens every single year since 2003. It's been happening. Always happens where quarterbacks expected to go really high, end up falling. So I don't even think it's outside of the realm of possibility that the Giants get their guy at number 6.
This comment from Tony made me laugh, so I want to pull this up before we get into the last topic of the day. He goes, I would rather redraft Zach than take Nix. That's how far out I am on Bo Nix. Listen, it didn't work out for Zach Wilson at the NFL level, obviously, but I don't think that's crazy. I think Zach was a better prospect than Bo Nix, but I don't, sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah, situation is everything, and I think that the Jets just weren't the right situation for Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson probably wasn't the right quarterback for the Jets. But here's an outside of the box idea here for the Giants. trade for Zach Wilson. I would be really upset if they did that.
Yeah, but please. I will take what do you got? A 6th, 7th round pick you want to toss our way? You'll take the $5.5 million off the books?
Our 2030 conditional 7th.
In. Perfect. He's yours. Things you just absolutely love to see. Let's close out talking a little Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers did his 65th podcast appearance of the offseason this week, and he talked about his Achilles injury. And he shared on the show that he really thought that it could be a career ender, like sitting there on the turf. He's like, man, people don't come back from this. But I found it interesting how he talked about the recovery and the recovery that he did make last season, and got himself to a spot where he was able to practice the final month of the year before the Jets were eliminated, and he didn't end up making that return that he wanted to. But obviously it's going to be really big for the Jets what version of Aaron Rodgers they're getting. So just talking or hearing him talk about the Achilles injury and what it was like for him to go through, it's sounded really daunting.
Yeah, it actually kind of reminds me of yesterday. I saw Cam Newton was talking about Kirk Cousins. I don't know if you saw that viral clip that he had. I think he was speaking with Shannon Sharp, and he mentioned that years ago when Shannon Sharp was playing, an Achilles tear, I mean, that's probably career ending. You're probably not coming back from that. Of course, sports and medical science have advanced quite a bit since Shannon Sharp was playing. So now you have players that come back from these Achilles injuries and look like their same old self. But there's definitely risk involved with this. Will Rodgers return and be the player that he once was? Will he be able to play at a high level still? These are definitely question marks that you're going to have for the Jets going into the 2024 season. And ultimately, that is the question, is what are you getting out of Aaron Rodgers? That's what we were hoping to get the answer to last year. Rodgers maybe steps in, plays some great football. Jets go to the playoffs. Didn't happen because he got injured. Does it happen this year? Maybe he doesn't look like the same player. That's also a possibility. So it's interesting to hear kind of Rodgers give his perspective on that. Rodgers loves to give his perspective on anything and everything, as you kind of mentioned, a lot of podcast appearances. But at least this time, it was kind of interesting to hear what is a player's reaction when they do sustain like such a significant injury. And I always find that kind of intriguing. So Rodgers giving his kind of outlook on that was definitely a worthwhile soundbite.
Yeah, and Johnny chimes in. He listened to it. He said that podcast interview was amazing. Him saying that he needed an ego check himself, and he choked up when he stated that he had to ask for help for his recovery. That right there speaks volumes about him. And like where I wanted to go with this conversation was, while yes, I think obviously at his age and coming off that injury, there is risk involved of like what version of Aaron are you going to get? Is he going to be someone who could function and play the quarterback position? But I think something that keeps me a little bit more on the positive side, other than just like I'm a Jets fan and I want him to be good, is he seems like he takes everything personally and is going to want to prove a lot of people wrong. And there are a ton of Aaron Rodgers doubters right now. It was happening last off season, and just it was kind of like he wanted to go scorched earth against the Packers for giving up on him, and the league for doubting him, and then the injury. Like, I don't know. I don't think Aaron Rodgers and his ego is going to want his lasting memory or his last memory in the NFL to be laying on that field at MetLife Stadium and then like coming back and not being the same. I'm not saying he's going to win MVP this year. I don't think we're getting 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, but can he come in and play as a top 15 quarterback in the NFL? I think that's something that's still on the table. I think he could still be a good, very good quarterback in this league.
And I'll agree with you just because I think that a lot of what makes a quarterback so great is mental. And Aaron Rodgers has always been among the smartest players in the league, reading defenses, finding open windows, all that stuff, checking at the line of scrimmage and changing plays. Rodgers is not going to lose that just because, he lost a year due to injury. He's lost seasons to injury in the past before. Had the collarbone injury way back when he was on the Packers. So I think that Rodgers at his worst is still going to be a very good quarterback. Maybe he's not MVP level, like you said, and I don't think anyone's expecting that of him, but because he is such a good quarterback and always has been, and has always been such a smart quarterback, you can't expect some significant regression here and expect his game to completely fall off a cliff, because so much of the game is played through your mind, and Rodgers still has that. So I think that you're at least in store for above average quarterback play from the Jets this season. And with this roster, above average should be enough to get you into the postseason. And then once Rodgers is in the postseason, that's kind of it. That's what you're hoping to get. You want to see playoff Aaron Rodgers. He's had some spectacular moments in the past. Obviously, he's come up short in a lot of big games as well. But you think of some big comeback moments like the one against the Cowboys many years ago. There's plenty of Aaron Rodgers magic. I think that there's still left in the tank here.
Lawrence chimes in and says Rodgers played with a broken finger and jacked up ribs the last time we saw him too. And that wasn't it your Giants who hurt his finger in the London game that year in 2022?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you are right about that one.
Yeah, so we'll see as well what he looks like at that time. He also follows it up with birthday. I think Brady was still good at 45. He was just tired of it because his personal stuff and the old line got worse. I don't know if we get Aaron Rodgers to 45. I mean, that'd be great, obviously. But, I mean, you look at him, like he still looks like he's in great shape. I don't think it's crazy to say he has, 2 years maybe? I would sign up for 24 and 2025 with Aaron Rodgers.
I think you can get another 2 years out of him, depending on how this season goes, though. I mean, if this one's a disaster, maybe he does call it quits, but then you can also argue if the season's a disaster, maybe it lights a fire in him and it makes him want to return even harder for the 2025 season. I think, it'll be interesting to see how it shapes out. I do want to say that the crazy thing about Brady still being good at 45, I feel like if he wanted to step back into the NFL right now and keep playing, he'd still be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. That's the crazy part about Tom Brady. I don't think he's even lost it quite yet. He probably won't for like another 5 years knowing him. That guy is an absolute mutant. You really do have to appreciate like how great some of these NFL quarterbacks are while they're still in the league. And Aaron Rodgers is up there. He's one of those guys. You got to appreciate the fact that he's even still playing at this age and hopefully making an impact and playing some good football.
Hope so. That'd be a ton of fun. We'll close with Tony's comment here. AR had league best continuity in Green Bay and now league worst with the New York Jets. Well, they're bringing a lot of guys back, but they have added some. The offensive line continuity, I think, is going to be the biggest thing for the Jets this season. They obviously signed 3 guys, signed 2 and traded for Morgan Moses. And I think the health of the offensive line is really going to be the make or break for this Jets season in 2024.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think that health among the team in general is going to make or break this team, but on the offensive line in particular. And in terms of the continuity, though, you do have to at least appreciate that he's got coaching continuity. I mean, whether or not you're happy about that, maybe you wanted to change at OC, maybe you even wanted to change at head coach, totally possible. But at least he's got that continuity, and that should help Aaron Rodgers as he moves into his second campaign with the Jets.
There we go. So that's going to do it for us on the Thursday edition of Big Apple Blitz. We'll be back again on Monday at 11 o'clock. Make sure to follow Anthony's Giants work over at Fireside Giants, as well as his channel for NFL draft coverage, my channel, Matt O'Leary NY, for all things New York Jets, and also Talking Jets as well. Ton of Jets coverage over there. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. Leave a like before you head out of here. Make sure to subscribe if you are new, and we'll catch you next time.